They sealed it with wax and prayer. They said the crypt was empty, but the bells had never stopped. Chapel Hill was never known for scandal. It was known for obedience. But beneath its altar lay a secret so old, even Rome denied it. In 1992, the final priest was transferred without reason. The chapel closed, and the ground was never blessed again. It begins with the trees tall, silent, older than the state line itself. Birch and maple, bowed by years of snow, their branches tapering into the fog like fingers losing shape. Somewhere, beyond them, a black roof breaches the canopy, angled, unwelcoming. Half swallowed by moss. In 1889, the Archdiocese accepted a donation of land in northeastern Vermont. A gift, they were told, from a man whose name no one now repeats. A man who didn't live to see the chapel's construction. He died before he could sign the deed, but the papers were processed anyway. The land was surveyed, foundations drawn. Within 7 months, laborers broke ground. The first stone was blessed by a traveling bishop, whose name, oddly, was never entered into diocesan logs. A formality, they said, one of many overlooked formalities. The chapel was small. Narrow nave, vaulted ceiling, 2 rows of pews, 10 each. A single bell tower with no ladder. Beneath the altar, a crypt, sealed, unfinished, and meant only for the dead. And then there were the doors, carved from black pine, imported, no records of who commissioned them, or why pine was chosen over cedar or oak, but witnesses said they were heavy, strangely so, not because of weight, but resistance. They stuck when opened, groaned when closed, as if something inside them didn't want to move. The first priest assigned to the chapel was Father Dunn, Irish-born, soft-spoken, known for his punctuality and his preference for silence. He wrote in one of his earliest letters, "I have blessed the nave twice, but still the wind seems to speak through it. Not howl, not whistle, speak, as if there's a shape to it I do not yet know how to read." The congregation was small, mostly farmers, their families. Attendance varied with the harvest, but no one stayed past dusk. No evening mass was ever held at Chapel Hill, because by dusk, the doors began to shift. That started as a sound, a faint creak, not constant, not violent, just once, then again, and then nothing. But by the end of the first month, the pattern was undeniable. Father Dunn began barring the chapel doors with iron hooks, then chains, then both. But still by morning, they would be ajar. No marks of forced entry, no scratches, no bent metal, just open by inches, and always facing east. There are only 2 surviving photographs of Chapel Hill before 1900. Both, the doors are wide open, taken at dawn, mist curling around the steps. No one in the frame, but it's the shadows that raise questions. Not behind the doors, but in front, long, faint, bending toward the chapel. Not away from it. In the spring of 1890, Father Dunn invited a local carpenter, Abram Wesley, to stay overnight and examine the hinges. Wesley brought his eldest son, age 16. They arrived before sunset, sat in the back pew, waited. By midnight. Nothing had happened. Then came the first sound, like wood shifting underwater. Then the groan, slow, wet, and deliberate. Wesley lit his lantern. The chains were still fastened, but the doors moved. They bowed inward, then snapped back. Then again, when Wesley approached, the light flickered. He said the wood felt warm to the touch, as if it had absorbed heat from inside. He didn't return. The next morning, Father Dunn found the chains removed, neatly coiled on the floor, the iron hooks unscrewed and stacked. The carpenter was never seen again. His son, found in the woods 2 miles north, was barefoot, shivering, and unable to speak for 3 days. When asked what happened, the boy only said, "It wanted to open, and it wasn't for us." Word spread. Parishioners stopped coming. Some claimed their children cried when walking past the chapel. Others said their horses refused to approach the path. There were rumors, as there always are, that the doors were cursed, that they were made from wood taken from a gallows. but the church issued no statement, only that repairs would be made, that the wind in the valley was strong, that Father Dunn was under strain. Then, in December of that year, a storm struck the hillside, heavy snow, 4 3-mile-per-hour winds. A chimney collapsed. The belfry cracked, but the doors remained open, even with snow blowing sideways. Even as the frame shifted, even as trees bent in half, the doors stood open, not torn, not rattled, just open. And facing east after that, Dunn stopped writing. His final note, scrawled in the margin of an old hymnal, read, "If it is not the wind, and not the wood, then it must be the will, but I do not know whose." He was reassigned. Following spring, his replacement was never named. Some say there was no one after him, that the chapel was closed until 1893. But the logs show something strange. The diocese continued listing weekly masses, continued counting donations, continued marking baptisms and funerals, none of which can be verified, as if the chapel continued to function, but no one saw who opened the doors or closed them. And even now, when the wind is calm, the trees still bend away from the chapel, like something inside is exhaling and waiting. Mist clung to the valley that morning. It draped itself over the black roof of Chapel Hill like morning cloth, settling along the eaves, soaking into the stone. The trees were silent, the birds absent. And yet, at the gate, a carriage waited. The driver said nothing. The horses refused to move beyond the fence line. They pawed the earth, whined, backed away, but the man inside stepped out anyway. He wore no red, no mitre, no ring, just a wool coat lined with ash colored silk, a small crucifix at his throat, the chain hidden beneath his collar. He carried no suitcase, no assistance, only a walking stick and a folded document bearing no name. They say he was tall, pale, eyes that didn't blink when spoken to. They called him Phino, not a bishop of the diocese, not even of the region. He was not expected. And yet, when the doors opened, they did not resist him. It was July 1892, 3 years since the chapel had been consecrated, 3 years since Father Dunn had vanished from official record. And now, from nowhere, a high ranking prelate had arrived unannounced and gone directly into the chapel. Alone. He would not come out for 4 days. No carriage remained, no horse, no driver. He simply walked through the doors, and the fog closed behind him. A groundskeeper named Abel Mori was the last to see him outside. He was sweeping the east steps when the figure passed by. He described the air around the Archbishop as wrong, cold, but not like weather, more like walking into a room that's already full. Inside, the chapel remained dark. No lights, no bells, no sounds. For the next 4 days, no one entered, and no one dared, but people watched from the tree line, from the rise just past the riverbed. They said candles flickered behind the chapel's stained glass windows, though the curtains were never drawn. They said the organ played softly at impossible hours. And once, just after midnight on the third day, a woman claimed she saw something through the upper window. Not a man, a shadow bending the wrong way, arms moving too slowly. And then the curtain closed. The chapel's groundskeeper reported nothing amiss, but he stopped sleeping, refused to go near the altar, and left the post entirely by the end of the week. Inside the chapel, beneath the altar, was a crypt. It had remained sealed since the building's completion, a space carved into bedrock, narrow and unfinished, intended perhaps for future relics or entombment. No one remembered who had ordered it. The stone steps were steep, slick. They turned once, then again, and at the bottom silence. When the chapel was finally unlocked again, the Archbishop was gone. No one saw him leave. No carriage returned. No horses were heard. Only the doors, found open again, as they had been so many mornings before. But something was different. The crypt had changed. The seal on the iron gate had been replaced. An old cross, carved in relief on the stone lintel, was worn away. In its place, a circle intersected by two vertical lines, like a chalice. Split in half. It was not a recognized sigil, but those who saw it did not ask questions. The gate itself had been reinforced, hinges oiled, lock changed. And just beneath the new seal, carved delicately into the stone, FTHE, A Archdiocese issued no announcement. No statement of visitation, no letters, no travel logs. Inquiries were redirected, archives locked. It was as if he had never come, but rumors grew that the Archbishop had not come to bless the chapel, that he had come to put something back, that he had brought with him not a message, but a burden. There is a story told in hushed tones by caretakers who served at the chapel in the decades after, that once every season, just after the third night of the new moon, the gate to the crypt would rattle, only slightly, barely enough to hear. And if you stood very still at the altar, you could feel the stones shift under your feet, not from pressure, not from time. But as if something below had rolled over. In sleep. Waiting. Snow still lay along the edges of the chapel wall. Even in early March. It clung to the stone like a memory that refused to melt. The trees had begun to thin by then, disease or blight. No one was sure, but they stood brittle and bent, their trunks darkened with frost. A few birds had returned to the hills, but they didn't sing. The chapel was silent at Lent, until the music began. It started softly. One voice, faint and high, barely audible over the wind. Then another joined, then another, rising, falling, always in harmony. There was no announcement. No posters, no mass schedule, just the sound drifting through the stone, the air, the ground. Not loud, but full. The records make no mention of an official choir being assigned to Chapel Hill in 1896. Yet for 40 days that Lent, voices sang behind closed doors. They called it the Orphan Choir. No names were given. No faces ever seen. Only sound. It was Mrs. Ennis, an elderly parishioner who lived just below the hill, who first asked about them. She said the voices didn't sound like children. They sounded older. She had taught music for 20 years. Her ear was trained. Children don't know modes like that, she said. They don't sing in minor Latin intervals. They don't resolve that slowly. But the priests said nothing. Father Leclerc, who had taken over the chapel the previous year, dismissed her concerns. The children are a gift, he said. Their singing is part of the season's reflection. But something wasn't right. The hymns were unfamiliar, not the psalms of the stations, not the lamentations of Tenebrae. These were older, slower, wordless, carried more by tone than melody. And always the same pattern. Dusk, a single note, then layering voices, then silence. One woman described it as beautiful, another disturbing, like something remembering how to sound human. No one saw them enter. No wagons, no cloaks, no footsteps in the frost. But the voices came, and they grew more complex. Merchant passing through the town said he heard Gregorian phrasing in 5... tone, structure, and asked who trained them. He was told to leave. 3 days later, he returned, just once. To stand outside the chapel after sunset. He left pale and shaking. When asked what he'd heard, he said, "It's not what they're singing, it's what's listening." Local children were told to stay away, but one boy, David Elm, climbed the hillside one Sunday morning. Curious, he found the chapel doors locked. No voices, no candles, but he saw something strange through the stained glass. Not children, not people. Just shadows, small, moving without shape, shifting like smoke underwater. He never spoke of it again. That same week, the singing changed. No longer just at dusk, but in the early hours before dawn. Then again at noon. Shorter, more urgent. And always in a language no one could place. The Latin scholars at the local seminary couldn't identify it, nor the French Jesuits who once taught in the region. One claimed it resembled pre-vulgate structure. Another refused to comment. By Good Friday, the entire hill fell silent. No birds, no wind. Only the sound of soft singing low, rhythmic echoing faintly across the valley. Witnesses said it didn't seem to come from the chapel anymore. It came from beneath. There are no baptismal records for any choir members that year. No confirmation names, no documents, no letters, nothing in the diocesan archives. Only a fragment of a ledger found in the chapel's vestry decades. Later, March 14th, 3 more arrived, all small, very quiet, teeth not grown. Will need warmth. April 2nd. Do not open the box until the song ends. April 9th. Cannot tell which one begins it anymore. Voices blend. Even in sleep. No signature. Just a scrawled symbol in the corner. The same chalice. Split. Mark seen on the crypt seal. After Easter. The singing stopped. The chapel held a mass the following Sunday. No music. No mention. No choir. A visiting deacon asked what happened to the children. Father Leclerc said there were never any children. And then he smiled. The next year, parishioners reported a strange pattern during Lent, a soft vibration in the stone. As if the walls remembered something. If you leaned close enough, you could almost hear it. A hum, a harmony, like breath held in a mouth too small to be seen. Waiting to sing again. The sun rose slow that morning, filtered through thick cloud. Its light came pale and yellow, like old parchment set aflame. A chill hung in the chapel's wooden rafters, despite the candles lit for Palm Sunday. Even the incense sweet and heavy seemed to hover too low in the air, refusing to rise. The pews were fuller than usual. Parishioners gathered in wool coats, gloves tucked into hymnals, palms clutched nervously in hand. It had rained the night before, enough to soak the earth and leave the stone steps slick. Inside, the crucifix hung above the altar, as it always had, 7 feet tall, carved from ash. The figure of Christ, elongated, almost gaunt. The arms seemed stretched too far, the feet too narrow for balance. His eyes were cast downward. As if watching. The altar boy that day was 12, Joseph Morey, son of the groundskeeper. Small, soft. Spoken. His shoes were too large, borrowed from an older cousin. He arrived early, lit the front candles, polished the brass. And when he turned to dust the crucifix, he noticed the drip. At first, it looked like dew, just a glisten, caught in the curve of the wooden ribs. But then another drop, and another. By the time Father Leclerc stepped into the sanctuary, it had begun to streak. Not quickly, but with gravity, like a slow, precise weeping, from the figure's side, then from the hands, then from the mouth. Red. Not thick, not coagulated, but unmistakable. Joseph reached for a cloth. The priest stopped him. For a long moment, no one moved. And then, as if remembering his role, Father Leclerc began the Mass. He did not address the bleeding. He did not look at the cross again. The congregation noticed. Murmurs filled the space between hymns. Some stood, others left, but Joseph remained. He stood beneath the crucifix as the final hymn ended, waiting, staring upward, and that's when he heard it, a small sound from inside the wall, not behind the wood, beneath it. Like breath held in a hollow place. Later, that evening, Joseph returned. He told his father he had forgotten a cloth. The church was supposed to be locked, but the doors opened without resistance. The candles had been extinguished. The air smelled of wax and iron. He walked slowly, pausing beneath the crucifix. No blood remained, only a faint stain where the drops had landed. He made his way toward the sacristy, passing the altar rail, heading behind the curtain. No one ever saw him again. His father searched through the night. The chapel was empty, the nave cold, the side doors barred, the crypt locked. By morning, Bishop Renaud had arrived from the regional seat, unscheduled, unannounced. He did not offer comfort to the Morey family. He did not call the sheriff. Instead, he took the chapel keys, descended to the crypt. And emerged 40 minutes later, pale, with a cloth pressed to his hand. He said nothing of what he saw, but the key was never returned. The gate remained sealed. 2 days later, a short letter was delivered to the diocese. Typed, unsigned. Do not open the crypt without full clerical authority present. The boy has entered the mystery. That is sufficient. It was never explained. Joseph's body was never found. The Maury family left Vermont that spring. The chapel continued its schedule. The bleeding cross was replaced with a smaller bronze figure. No mention was made in the parish ledger, only a single line written in pencil, faint in the margin. Palm pierced, no longer wood. Years later, a nun stationed at the chapel said she saw the old crucifix, not hung, but stored, wrapped in burlap, leaning upright against the inner wall of the crypt. She said the cloth around its mouth was damp. And when she turned her back, she swore she heard it breathing. The renovation crew arrived just after dawn. 3 men, cold breath rising through the morning mist. Their boots sunk softly into the overgrown path, half swallowed by mud and decades of neglect. Chapel Hill had been shut for years by then. Services stopped, records sealed, even the bell tower silent. The floorboards were soft with rot. Pigeons nested in the rafters. Vines curled around the stone windows, where the glass had begun to warp from years of frost and heat. But the crypt stayed locked. They weren't supposed to go down there. The order was clear: focus on the foundation. Patch the west wall. Leave the lower levels alone. Still, on the 3rd day, one of the workers noticed something strange in the sacristy floor. A square of wood that didn't match the rest. When they pulled it loose, they found a narrow crawl space, not part of the original blueprints. Dry, despite the season, covered in dust. And at the far end, resting atop a rusted tin box, was a leather ... bound journal. Cracked, stiff, no title, just the initials EM etched into the inside cover. First entry was dated August 4th, 1911. I've been asked not to speak about the doors anymore. That's fine. I'll write instead. The man who wrote it was Elia Merrow, a local former mill worker, hired by the chapel as a groundskeeper in the fall of 1909. He wasn't clergy, had no family, but he stayed on the property for over 14 years. Never missed a day. Most of the journal was practical weather reports, maintenance notes, inventory. But beginning in 1913, the tone shifted. There's something wrong with the crypt. I don't mean rats. I mean the air. It's too still down there. Even the flame bends the wrong way. At first, no one believed it, but Merrow kept writing every night. Just past midnight, I hear it. Not footsteps, not voices, something slower, like breath trying to become a word. And then the sound, like prayer, but pulled backwards. He tried recording it. Brought down a wax cylinder. The needle snapped. He tried describing it to the parish priest, Father Luce. But Luce dismissed it. Told him to pray harder, keep the chapel clean, burn more incense. So Merrow stopped talking, and the journal entries grew darker. March 2nd, I opened the crypt again, not to go in, just to listen. There's something under the floor now, like pacing, but the sound is wrong, like it's being slowed by water. March 19th, I asked about the Archbishop's seal again. No one will tell me what it means, but the stone around it is warmer than the rest, even in winter. April 8th, something called my name. The handwriting began to slant. Sentences lost structure. Words repeated, but always. He returned to the sound. It's not in Latin, not Greek, not human. Too slow for breath, too fast for thought. I've started waking up with my mouth open. I think I'm saying it back to it. The final entry came in 1923. I'm not afraid, not anymore. But I think I know what it wants. It doesn't want worship, it wants memory. And I think that's why it sings backward. Merrow was never seen after that spring. His belongings remained in the small room above the east steps, still folded, still clean, but his boots were gone, and so were the keys to the crypt. A priest assigned in 1974 reviewed the journal. He left after 2 weeks. His only comment handwritten on the back of the final page. This isn't a diary, it's a transcription. That winter, the chapel's foundation cracked. No frost, no rain. Just a sudden break right beneath the altar. When they lowered a sensor into the space below, the equipment failed. The microphone picked up only one sound. Slow rhythm, low and distant, like a voice unspooling from under the stone. And somewhere, just beneath the static, a name being said in reverse. ELIA. The road to Chapel Hill was still frozen in late March. Snow no longer fell, but the ground remained hard-rutted by cartwheels, glistening in patches where ice refused to thaw. The birch trees lining the path had lost their bark in long vertical strips, revealing pale, wounded trunks beneath. That morning, a cart arrived. No escort, no procession, just 4 men in dark coats. They came without words. The villagers who watched from the tree line would later say the men didn't speak, not to each other, not to the priest who waited at the gate, not even during the unloading. The cart carried one item, a small coffin. Oak, bound in iron, no markings, no name. Its size was wrong, short, narrow, unfitted for a grown body, but it was. Not the shape that disturbed the locals. It was the way the coffin moved. It didn't rattle. It didn't shift with the road. It stayed steady, as if something inside was anchoring it in place. The priest who met them, Father Hid, opened the doors without question. He gave no blessing, no prayer. He led the men down the side steps, into the crypt. It was not buried. It was placed. Set against the northern wall. Beneath the Archbishop's seal, the 4 men left without speaking, and no one ever saw them again. That evening, the chapel lights flickered for the first time. They had been installed only the year before, an upgrade approved reluctantly by the diocese. Gas fixtures, simple, practical. But at dusk, each flame dimmed, then flared, then settled, just slightly off rhythm. Father Hid made note of it in his journal. The light bends away from the crypt wall, as if reacting to breath, but there is no draft, no gap, nothing behind the stone. The next night, the same. And the next. For 17 evenings, the pattern repeated. Always at dusk, always from the far end of the chapel. Not a gust, not a breeze. Just a presence, a slow dimming, as if the light were being tasted. The altar boy Thomas Grieve reported hearing a noise from beneath the floor. He said it was like a whisper, but made by no mouth. He stopped assisting after the 3rd night. When asked why, he only said the lights blinked in time with something breathing. Parishioners noticed 2. During Mass. They would glance toward the crypt stairs. As if waiting for someone or something to ascend. One woman fainted after claiming she saw a hand at the railing. Small, paler than wax. But when others turned, nothing was there. The bishop was notified. He ordered the crypt sealed. But no exorcism was conducted. No rite performed, only silence. The coffin remained. Local stonemason William Capp was contracted to reinforce the walls. He refused to go near the coffin, said the floor beneath it sounded wrong. Not hollow, not solid, just listening. 3 nights later, he was found wandering the woods. No coat, no shoes. His ears were bleeding. He never spoke again. The journal of Father Hid grew increasingly fragmented. Entries went from full paragraphs to single lines, to marks in the margins. I lit the candles at noon. They still flickered. The child's name is sealed inside. That is why it cannot leave. The light isn't failing. It's recoiling. We placed it there, not to keep it hidden, but to keep it fed. It is unclear who we referred to. No other clergy are recorded at the chapel that spring. No visitors listed, no funerals conducted. And yet, the chapel, doors opened every morning, and the lights flickered every dusk. On April 12, 1901, Father Hid disappeared. His journal was found on the altar, open to a page dated 1 day prior. The coffin is colder now, as if the thing inside has turned to face the wall. I hear scratching, but not from wood. It is trying to remember its name. I think I was meant to forget mine first. His room showed no signs of struggle. His coat was still hanging by the door. The lantern at his bedside was lit, but the light from it bent strangely across the floor angled toward the crypt. The next priest assigned refused to enter the lower level he would serve the chapel for 6 years, but never once descend the stairs. When asked about the sealed coffin, he said, "Some things are not buried because they are dead. Some are buried so they don't remember they were alive." The coffin was never removed, and for a time, the chapel lights returned to normal. But on cold nights, even now, the west wall grows dim just after sunset, only for a moment, as if something beneath the floor still breathes and waits for dusk to remember its shape. The newspaper office was quiet when he found the letter. Rain tapped softly against the window panes. One bulb flickered in the far corner of the room. The other desks were empty, already cleared for the weekend. But Warren Bell stayed behind. He always stayed behind. He had grown up less than 10 miles from Chapel Hill, walked past its gate every school day for nearly a decade. He remembered when the bells still rang, when candles flickered behind stained glass, and he remembered when it stopped. By 1952, the chapel had been closed for almost 20 years, officially, but no explanation was ever given. No notice, no ceremony. It had simply vanished from use. And so had its history. When Bell was assigned a regional religion column, he chose to write about it. He expected little: a short article, some folklore, a paragraph or two about a shuttered parish, maybe a quote from the diocese. But something wasn't right. There were no files in the local archive. No baptismal records. No construction permits. No diocesan bulletins. No sacramental registries. It was as if the chapel had never existed. But Bell had seen it. He had walked through its doors as a boy. He had heard the songs at dusk. When the orphan choir practiced before Lent, he had watched a priest light incense on Palm Sunday. And yet, when he contacted the regional office, they told him there was no such location on record. They said he must be mistaken, that the only chapel in the Northern Hills had collapsed in a fire in 1888, a date that did not match. Bell wrote to the Archdiocese directly, then to the provincial archives in Montreal. And finally to Rome. Weeks passed. Then months. He began compiling what he could: old maps, newspaper clippings, obituaries, even vague mentions and personal letters. It became an obsession. He kept a corkboard in his office, covered in pins and twine, names, dates, a photo of a strange symbol, 2 vertical lines crossing a circle, found etched into the back of a donation ledger. But then the envelope arrived. No return address. Cream. Colored paper, heavy, textured, Vatican seal, embossed and real. Inside, a single typed response: "We thank you for your inquiry. There is no record of such a chapel. If it exists, it is not recognized by the Holy See." There was no signature, no date, only the final sentence, centered and slightly indented: "Not all things built in his name are built by his will." Bell didn't publish the letter. He photocopied it, pinned it to the board, and placed the original in a manila folder, and locked it in his drawer. He stopped the series, sighed. The trail had gone cold. But coworkers noticed something change. He no longer stayed late. He started bringing a rosary to work and wearing it tucked beneath his shirt. He asked to be reassigned to weather reports, and he refused to discuss Chapel Hill again. One night, his assistant found him standing by the file cabinet, staring into the dark. When asked what was wrong, he whispered, "I thought they'd at least lie better." Later that year, he moved south, quit journalism entirely, took a job cataloging books at a small Catholic college. His corkboard was found in the trash. All the pins were gone. Only one thing remained: a torn photograph, taped to the center. An image of the chapel's crypt gate, taken in low light. Stone was cracked, the symbol faint, but in the upper corner, Someone had scrawled something in pen, barely legible, letters shaking. It hears when its name is forgotten. Bell died in 1976. No obituary ran. The college released no public statement. But, years later, a student researcher found a note wedged inside a borrowed text. It had no heading, no source, only 4 lines written in fading ink. There is a record, but not in their books. It was buried in stone and song. Not hidden, just denied, because even the Vatican forgets what it can't silence. The student filed it into a miscellaneous drawer, but before he closed the folder, he thought he heard something behind the wall, like a page, turning itself. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of rot. Moss clung thick to the chapel's base, curling into the joints of the stone like something trying to pry its way in. A gutter had cracked during the storm. Water had run unchecked down the outer wall, seeping into the foundation. By morning, the crypt had flooded. Just an inch or two, enough to collect in the center groove, enough to soak the steps and stir the mildew that had settled across the flagstone. Father Roulaine arrived just after sunrise. He had been assigned to Chapel Hill 6 months earlier. A late placement, quiet, meant for men like him, obedient, unmarried, willing to keep the doors locked and the sacraments quiet. He found the water pooled in a slow spiral, almost still, but not quite. He didn't call for help. Instead, he brought a lantern, a bucket, a worn leather prayer book. And descended the stairs alone. The walls were sweating. Even before he reached the lowest step, he noticed it, the way the damp stone reflected his light in strange directions. The archways seemed smaller, the air thinner, and the smell? Not sewage, not mold. But wax, and something beneath it. He began to mop. He worked in silence, bucket by bucket. He lifted the coffin at the far end slightly, just enough to dry beneath it. That's when he noticed the markings. At first, they looked like old stains, but as he followed the pattern along the northern wall, he realized they formed a seam. An outline, like a door, long sealed, then forgotten. He touched the edges. Stone, cold, but wrong. His hand came back dry. Dusty. As if the wall had been covered, not by water, but by something older. He brought a chisel from the vestry, and he began to dig. The stone flaked away too, easily. As if it had never meant to hold, as if it had been softened like wax left too near the fire. 3 inches in, he struck something hard, but it wasn't rock. It was bone, not in pieces, whole, woven into the mortar like reinforcement, like it had been placed there. He kept digging, and beneath the bone, more wax, pressed into the shape of a hand. Small. Fingers outstretched, as if reaching through from inside. Then salt. Not in piles, not spilled, but laid out. In lines, careful, intentional. A grid, a ward, a seal. He stopped. He sat down. And then the air shifted. He would later write that it didn't smell different. It sounded different, like the silence itself had curled inward. He tried to speak, but his voice caught. So he prayed instead, but the words sounded backward, even to him. He fled the crypt before sunset. He locked the door, bolted it, barred it, and still he heard it. That night beneath the chapel floor, something pacing. Softly, slowly. As if remembering the shape of its own steps. He wrote a letter. The next morning, addressed to no one. Just the phrase, "In the event of my absence, there are bodies in the walls, but they're not buried, they're arranged. They were placed like liturgy, each bone a verse, each joint a name. The wax holds the breath, the salt holds the memory, but neither are holding now." The letter was never mailed. It was found folded neatly beneath his mattress. Beside it, a small sack of salt, torn at the corner, and a single wax fingerprint pressed onto the bed frame. He was found outside the chapel gates 2 days later, shivering, mute. His hands were raw, nails split, dirt under every fingertip. The nurses at the facility said he repeated one sentence for weeks. Quietly, like a child trying to remember a song. They were never buried. They were only hidden. No one ever returned to clean the crypt. No further renovations were attempted, and the seam in the wall, it no longer appeared on the blueprints. But beneath the plaster, beneath the wax and salt, the bones remain. Not resting. Just waiting. The hill had been quiet for years. No bells, no mass, no children's voices rising through the trees. Just the wind, moving slow through the birch, carrying a silence that felt pressed down, weighted. But on March 14th, 1992, something changed. It began just after 11 p.m. Too late for farmers to be awake, too early for morning roots to begin. A tremor passed beneath the north side of the hill, gentle, a rumble, more felt than heard. But it wasn't the movement that woke people. It was the smell. Burnt incense, and something deeper, the scent of earth, pulled too fast from burial. Damp, open, split. A few locals stepped onto their porches. One man, Raymond Greaves, would later say he thought the chapel had caught fire, but no smoke rose, no flames, only the ground, briefly unstilled. The next morning, word spread fast. The outer gate had been closed, heavy chain, padlock newly fitted. A sign was posted, laminated, plain, chapel closed until further notice. Structural failure under review. Do not enter. No crest. No diocesan seal. No date. Raymond Greaves, suspicious, contacted the local zoning board. They had no record of a collapse. No permits filed. No emergency calls placed. He called again, this time the diocese. He was told the chapel had long been decommissioned and no further inquiries were necessary. But that night, he returned to the gate with a flashlight. The path beyond was untouched. No construction tape, no warning signs, but something felt off. He described it later quietly at a town meeting as like the ground wasn't unsettling. The beam of his flashlight hit the main door, still intact, still shut, but the windows were broken. Not from the outside. From within. Jagged glass pushed outward, as if something beneath the chapel had shifted, hard enough to crack the frames. He stepped closer. That's when he heard it, the faint sound of wind rising from under the steps. But there was no breeze. No movement in the trees. No rustle. Just a slow, steady pull, like breath, drawn through a mouth that had never opened before. And then his light caught something in the cracks of the chapel wall. Black wax, melted, hardened again, running in thin, unnatural veins down the stone. He turned back, didn't return. The next day, didn't mention it again, but others noticed it. Too. In the days that followed, the chapel seemed to settle into something stranger. Birds stopped roosting on the roof. The grass around the foundation turned gray. Not dead, not frozen, just pale. A delivery driver, passing through the lower road, claimed he saw figures moving inside. Not people. Shadows. Long, out of proportion. He called the sheriff, but the sheriff refused to check. That spring, 3 researchers from a small theological college in Burlington came to investigate the site. Independent, quiet, unofficial. Their notes later, found in a forgotten archives, suggested something deeply unusual. The ground near the crypt entrance feels uneven. Despite appearing level, soil samples show no disturbance. But compasses refused to orient properly. We attempted to access the basement level. The door was warped. Something has shifted beneath the structure. Smell consistent with burnt resin and salt. Most alarming, none of the property appears on diocesan maps post. 1953. When asked, the office claims it was reabsorbed and deconsecrated, but no records show that. They left the next day. Their final entry, there was no collapse. At least not of the kind they mean. We believe the building was shut not for safety, but for silence. And the silence was not holding. By late summer, something deeper began to be felt. People living nearby reported strange sensations. Children waking with nosebleeds. Water turning slightly bitter, and the bells long removed were heard again by two separate residents. Not loud, not full, just a faint toll. Somewhere beneath the ground, one tone, drawn out, slowed, like it had been remembered too late. Still, no one came. No inspection was ever performed. No collapse ever documented. But the cracks beneath the chapel widened subtly. And one morning, in late September, the north retaining wall gave way, not violently, not with force, but with release. As if it had been holding in more. Then wait. The grass grew paler still. The scent of incense returned, and something beneath the crypt could be heard, shifting. Not in anger, not in pain, but in recognition. As if it knew that someone had finally noticed the silence was not natural. And that what collapsed was not stone, but memory. The fence is rusting. A simple chain. Linked perimeter, slumped and overgrown with vines. One side leans. The signs weather. Beaten and half. Torn, hang crooked along the posts. Unstable. LAND. Keep out property of state. Geological Agency. Nitrogen monoxide entry without PRM8. But there are no permits. There's no listed agency. And no one's seen a state employee on the hill in over a decade. Still, the signs remain. The path to the chapel is no longer paved. Whatever stones once marked it have long been overtaken by grass and frost and time. Only those who remember the sound of the bell know where the trail begins. And even fewer know where it ends. The building itself is gone. Nothing stands now. Not walls, not foundation. Just a slope of soft earth, slightly sunken at the center, like the ground exhaled beneath it. But some say that if you come at dusk, something stirs. Not visibly. Not in movement, but in sound. It begins low. Not music. Not, at first, just a pressure behind the ears. A feeling that something is turning. Like an unseen wheel, slow, ancient, buried. Then, tone. A vibration through the ribs. Like air being pulled through pipes that should no longer exist. And then, chords. Simple. Hollow. Too slow to be sung. Too structured to be silence. One traveler, a geologist by trade, was sent to survey the hill in 2016. He was warned not to linger after dark. His supervisor left early, citing bad weather. But the man, Jason Rayner, stayed behind to take samples. He reported nothing unusual until 6:48 p.m. At first, he thought it was wind, but the trees weren't moving. Then he heard it again. 3 notes, drawn out, intervals too exact for accident. He traced the sound to the slope near the center of the hill where the chapel once stood. The dirt there was soft, spongy, as if water ran beneath it. He knelt, pressed his hand to the earth. It was warm. And then, on instinct, he leaned closer, pressed his ear to the soil, and heard voices, not loud, not clear, but patterned. He said it sounded like Latin, low and breathless, like breath pulled across broken lips. Not one voice, but many. Not in unison, but in structure, as if reciting from memory. Together, but differently. He wrote it off as echo, as hallucination, but he never returned. Others have tried. Curious. Hikers. Local thrill. Seekers. One woman, in 2020, recorded what she thought was ambient noise for her audio blog. When played back, the file contained something else. A hum. Underneath the crickets. Underneath the wind. A sound like pedals pressed by. Feet no longer there. A tone held just long enough to suggest intention. She deleted the file. Said it made her dream of doors opening where walls should be. And a hand brushing hers from beneath the ground. There is no official record of what lies beneath Chapel Hill. No maps. No schematics. Just fragments. A journal entry from 1896. A faded blueprint with lines that stop mid. Pot page. A missing altar boy's last drawing marked with shapes. No child should know, but the whispers continue. One local older now, nearly blind, still walks near the edge of the fence at sunset. He says the Mass never ended, that it just moved deeper. He says you can still hear them if you listen with the right kind of silence, the kind that doesn't wait to be filled. He said, the kind that waits to be obeyed. There are no priests at Chapel Hill. No rites, no sacraments, but the soil is warm, even in winter. And sometimes it breathes. You can feel it if you lie very still, long enough for your heartbeat to slow, long enough to hear the rhythm beneath your own. It isn't malevolent. It isn't merciful. Remembering something below is remembering what was, promised. What was hidden, and what was never laid to rest. Because crypts don't forget, they wait. And if you press your ear to the earth, you might hear them say amen. Not all holy ground is sacred. Some is merely sealed, and some is waiting to be opened again.